should be focusing on. I wonder if maybe we should spend some time, what does it mean to abide in the vine? Is that making sure that if you read correctly, that if we do abide, we can ask for whatever we want, and then we can get it. So apparently God did not want the Reverend Creflo Dollar to have a new private jet.
Not at all.
I could preach about that. But the question is that the most important thing that we ought to be talking about as followers of Jesus? And I'm not so sure that it is. Maybe we should focus on this idea of that we should be willing to go into the world and make disciples. But I think if there's anything in either of the two passages that really demands our attention, it really is the issue of power. So maybe that's what we need to talk about. The issue of power being that in this story, it's not about Philip possessing some magical power that he takes out to the poor and wretched of the earth at all. He only goes because God says, just go. You'll figure it out when you get there. But see, Philip, this isn't his first time on the road. He spent the rest of, and so it says then, at the very beginning of the passage, then. That's always that key reminder that we need to go backwards. And say, okay, well, what's about to happen probably is informed by what has happened. And what has happened was that Philip was hanging out with the wretched of the earth. At least from the minds of what he would have grown up as. He would have grown up knowing that people in Samaria were un-God lovers, that they did it wrong, that they didn't worship right, that these people were unclean. In fact, at one point, some of the disciples, when they are rejected by the Samaritans, are told by Jesus, ask Jesus, can we rain down fire on these people? They don't get that God has not decided to act in that way. Jesus says, don't worry about it, just shake the dust off your feet and move on. Because even if I'm rejected, I will still love them and treat them in loving ways. And that's where Philip is spending all of his ministry with these folks, and he's well received and welcomed. And so now he goes somewhere else. He's already begun to cross the boundaries of his fear, and now he's going somewhere else and learning what it means to be a resurrected person, to live the resurrection. So when God says go this time, he already has a little experience with God saying go and do things and not turning out all right for him. But when he goes to this encounter, he's not dealing with someone who is an outcast. He's dealing with a man who has access to the queen. A woman who ran an empire in Africa. And in fact, he's got the keys to the treasury. This is a man of power. That this lowly, uneducated man from Nazareth who followed Jesus goes and is bold enough to say, I'm willing to speak to someone in power. In fact, it's a pretty confrontational question. Someone's reading something, and could you imagine walking up to someone reading a book and go, do you know what you're reading there? Do you understand that? But it's only confrontational when we realize that Philip isn't in a position of power, so the question probably wouldn't have been asked that way. The truth of the matter is that though this man, this Ethiopian eunuch, who probably from an early age has had access to power because they've neutered him and made sure that he wouldn't mess with the queen and other women, maybe. He has access to all of these things, and yet despite this, his power has not blinded him from the ability to learn something new. So I wonder on some level if there is anything to talk about on this day. It has to do with trying to emulate the Ethiopian eunuch, the first non-Mediterranean follower of Jesus. Jews came first, the Samaritans came next, and the Ethiopians came after. You might be familiar, or you ought to look it up if you haven't seen it. It's one of the great Orthodox wings of the Christian church, is the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And they claim this eunuch as their patron saint, that he brought back the faith of Jesus Christ. So he's willing to learn. He's obviously at some point gone to Jerusalem to worship. He's what they call part of the God-fearers that I'll talk about in a minute. But look at this. He's willing to learn. When confronted by this seemingly uneducated poor person who comes up to him and says, do you understand what you're doing? He was willing to engage him as an equal. He's able to learn from someone who has no power, no status, no degree. He's willing to open his mind and learn. And that is a lesson too many folks of privilege have a hard time with. Oh yeah? What's your credentials? Where did you go to school? Or high school? Look at how folks of privilege have responded when rage has reached a head. When folks that finally can't take one more police stop, one more family member or friend who ends up in a hospital because they were taken in for questioning, folks get undone. They start telling the world what they know folks in Baltimore need to do. And the Ethiopian eunuch asks, how can I? I haven't been there. I don't know. Can you tell me? He admits he does not know. Instead of coming up with an answer and pretending that he knows everything, he knows what he does not know, and he's willing to risk admitting it. How many people of privilege will continue to listen to those who are removed from the ravages of race and poverty and consider them a voice of wisdom? Now I might step on some toes. What if Oprah had thought before she spoke? When she said, there's no leaders like Dr. King around. What if she had gone and found out firsthand instead of prognosticating from a distance and her privilege? Or what if the next white male who's asked for his opinion about black life, I'm hearing these words, by the way, as the preacher. What if he does what the manager of the Baltimore Orioles did when he was asked? What would you, as manager of the Baltimore Orioles, say to these young black protesters? And I wish I had a video clip of it, because it was brilliant. He says, I've never been a young black male. That's a ridiculous question. What would I have to offer to them? How would I know what they need to do? I haven't lived in their shoes, and I was floored. And the eunuch continues. Are these words? He doesn't hear a snippet and go, oh, I got it, I know what's going on. He hears the words and says, may I ask a question? May I ask a question about this that you know more than I? Is this about the prophet or about someone else? He keeps asking questions because he's hungry to know, because he knows that you don't know something when you first get a snippet of information on CNN or Fox News. What is, and here's the linchpin, by the way, of this passage, if we were going to talk about this, because I didn't know what to talk about this morning. What is to prevent me from being baptized? Now that question is really powerful because it's the first time that the eunuch is able to grasp something. And he's owning the fact that he knows, as someone who's probably a God-fearer, which means he knows the ancient text, he knows that no one with a crushed testicle may enter into the kingdom of God, into the temple. And so he says, do I have to continue to stand on the outskirts here? Ironically, in Isaiah, it even says the eunuchs will worship God. So there's two competing voices in Judaism in this. So we can't throw it all under the bus. It's just all about interpretation, right? Which side and who has the power gets to decide whether or not he's in. And there isn't anything. Philip doesn't say anything at all. Philip doesn't say anything. He just baptizes him. Because he said, I want to be baptized. I want to follow this Jesus who seems to welcome everybody, who crosses weird boundaries where the poor and the rich are hanging out together. My word. He was a follower of the God of Abraham and got to hear that despite all of his privilege, that he was a sexual minority, unwelcome because of his genitals. And then he heard, come, you're part of this story. And the message is clear. You are welcome. That you matter to God. And if I was going to preach a sermon today, that would have been it. I might have even added a few more illustrations. And maybe even tried to make it slightly contemporarily relevant. But my heart is not in it. because my mind is on other things. I can't think about a whole lot more these days because I can't get my mind off more dead black bodies. I can't stop thinking about gun violence ripping apart families and communities. I can't stop thinking about police who act like an occupying force in too many poor black and brown communities. I can't stop thinking about all of the inequality, the poverty, the broken schools that simply people accept. Because the truth of the matter is there'll never be enough police to keep us all in our place when there's nothing left for everyone else. And it makes you wonder in the back of your mind, well, at least it does to me, is it really an accident? Is it really because there was a surplus that we're turning our police into a militarized force in our communities? There will not be enough police or military when we are all wandering the streets without food. I can't stop also thinking about how so many people seem more concerned about broken windows than broken bodies. And I can't stop thinking about how politicians are calling for peace when we wage non-stop wars in places most Americans don't want to know about. We've been torturing people for 10 years. And the only person who's going to jail because of that is the person who exposed it. We're in trouble.